The Industrial Revolution wasn't a single bloody event like the French Revolution, but it was far more transformative for human life. It was a massive, decades-long shift, starting in the 1700s, where we stopped making things by hand in small shops and started making them by machines in huge factories. Think about everything around you: your clothes, your phone, the chair you're sitting on. None of it would exist without this shift from a simple farming life to a complicated, mechanized one. The whole revolution needed a massive power boost. For thousands of years, people relied on their own muscle, animals, or sometimes water wheels. But the new machines needed something much stronger. The key was coal, which offered much more energy than wood. When coal was used to heat water and create steam, it unleashed a whole new world of power. It was like going from using a slingshot to using a rocket engine. If you had to pick one invention that changed everything, it would be the refined steam engine. Before James Watt, steam engines were inefficient, mostly just used to pump water out of mines so people could dig deeper for coal. Watt's improvements made the engine small, efficient, and versatile enough to power anything. Once that happened, the steam engine wasn't just in the mines. It was in the factory, on the railroad, and even on ships crossing the ocean. The first industry to fully embrace machines was the textile industry, meaning everything related to cloth and clothing. Inventions like the spinning jenny and the power loom took a process that used to be slow, painstaking handwork and made it incredibly fast. Imagine making a week's worth of thread in an hour. This explosion of productivity meant clothes became cheaper, more available, and suddenly, the small-scale workers weaving at home couldn't compete with the massive output of the machines. Because the new machines were enormous, expensive, and needed a central power source like a steam engine, work had to move out of the home and into the factory. This was a huge social change. People went from setting their own hours and working at their own pace to following a strict schedule dictated by the machine. The noise, the heat, and the constant, repetitive nature of the work were all brand new realities for workers under the factory system. Once engineers figured out how to put a steam engine on wheels, the world shrank. Steam locomotives, trains, could haul huge amounts of goods and resources, like coal and iron, across a country much faster than wagons pulled by horses. Rivers and oceans were conquered by steamboats, which could travel against the current and weren't reliant on wind. For the first time, goods and people could travel far, quickly, and cheaply, linking distant markets together. From an economic standpoint, the result was mass production. With machines working tirelessly, factories could churn out huge volumes of identical products. This radically increased the supply of goods, everything from pots and pans to clothing, which, according to the laws of supply and demand, drove the prices down. Suddenly, things that were once luxuries, only affordable to the rich, became accessible to the growing middle and working classes. This era solidified the economic system we call capitalism. People who already had money, or capital, used it to build factories and buy the expensive machines. Their goal was profit. These industrial capitalists became incredibly wealthy and powerful because they owned the means of production, while the workers only owned their own labor. The government generally kept its hands off, believing the free market should run itself. As factories popped up in cities like Manchester and New York, people migrated in huge waves. This rapid shift from the countryside to cities is called urbanization. Farmers and rural laborers came searching for steady factory wages, even if they were low. Cities struggled to keep up with the influx, leading to overcrowding and a dramatic change in how people lived, moving from small, intimate rural communities to vast, anonymous urban centers. The new mass of people working for wages became the working class or proletariat. They no longer had the skills of a craftsman. Instead, they had simple, repetitive jobs operating or feeding a machine. Since they didn't own the machine, they were completely dependent on the factory owner for their job and their paycheck. Their livelihood rose and fell with the fortunes of the factory. The drive for maximum profit meant producers tried to keep costs as low as possible, and that cost often came out of the workers' health and safety. Workdays were brutally long, sometimes 14 to 16 hours. The factory floors were loud, poorly ventilated, and dangerous, with steam engines and machines running constantly and often unprotected. There was no minimum wage and no health insurance. If you got hurt, you were simply replaced. One of the saddest chapters of the Industrial Revolution is the widespread use of child labor. Children were often preferred because they were small enough to climb into the machines to fix broken threads, and they could be paid a fraction of an adult's wage. These children missed out on education, suffered frequent injuries, and endured permanent health problems due to the long hours and harsh environments. The sudden, massive growth of cities led to a housing crisis. Workers and their families were forced into crowded, poorly built apartment buildings called tenements in areas that became known as slums. These areas were breeding grounds for disease. With no municipal services, no police, no garbage collection, and raw sewage running in the streets, diseases like cholera spread rapidly, leading to tragically short life expectancies for the urban poor. While the working class struggled, a new group thrived, the industrial middle class. This group included the factory managers, the engineers who built the machines, the doctors who treated the rising population, and the merchants who sold the factory goods. They weren't born rich landowners, but they earned their wealth through skills, education, and business acumen. This class became a powerful force for social and political change. The incredible gap between the wealthy factory owners and the suffering workers inspired new social and political theories. Karl Marx, a German philosopher, looked at the system and argued that the rich were exploiting the poor. He believed the only solution was for the workers to rise up, overthrow the capitalist system, and create a communist society where wealth and property were shared equally. The workers themselves weren't passive. To fight for their rights, they formed labor unions. A single worker couldn't stand up to a factory owner, but a collective group could. Unions demanded better wages, shorter hours, and safer conditions, often using the threat of a strike, a complete work stoppage, to force owners to negotiate. It was a long, often violent struggle, but it gradually changed the balance of power. Eventually, public outcry and the pressure from unions forced governments to act as well. This led to reform legislation, such as the Factory Acts in Great Britain. These laws began to limit how many hours women and children could work, and later introduced mandatory inspections of factory conditions. These were the first steps toward governments taking responsibility for the welfare of their citizens and regulating the excesses of industry. The sheer scale of industrial production had a dramatic impact on the environment. Burning millions of tons of coal meant the air in industrial cities was thick with soot and smoke, causing widespread respiratory problems. Factories dumped toxic waste directly into rivers, polluting the water sources and killing wildlife. For the first time, human activity was causing massive, geographically widespread environmental damage. The factory system was so productive that industrial countries quickly needed more raw materials, like cotton for the textile mills, and more markets to sell their finished goods. This economic need drove the industrial powers, like Britain, France, and eventually the US, to seek control over weaker territories around the world. This is a direct link between the Industrial Revolution and the massive wave of imperialism that followed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Industrial Revolution is not just history, it is the foundation of our modern world. We live with its legacy every day. The way we travel, the sheer abundance of products we consume, the power of technology, and the structure of our cities. It brought immense wealth and a higher standard of living for many. But it also left us with the complex, ongoing challenges of wealth inequality and environmental sustainability. It truly reset the human experience.